This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 4 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland, and I'm delighted to be joined today by teacher, leader, consultant, and creator of the Learning Pit, James Nottingham. James, thank you for joining us on the show.
It's a delight to be with you, Gordon. Good to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good to see you again. And I'm super excited for today's episode, all about learning and how our children learn. But before we get into that, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I'm a teacher. And during my teaching career, I created the Learning Pit. And that has become a really popular way to talk about learning with young people. If you do a search online, you'll find literally hundreds and millions of mentions of the Learning Pit. So it's certainly caught the zeitgeist, which is somewhat surreal, but very, very nice feeling to think that something I created in a classroom just outside of Newcastle has now gone all around the world. In fact, I heard a Radio 4 program recently talking about the Learning Pit. They were saying it's from Japan, and I'm thinking Northumberland, just outside of Japan. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely made it to Japan, and it's used there a lot. But it started right here in Northumberland, and I hated school as a child. I think primary school was pretty good, but secondary, I got into all sorts of bother and got expelled from 2 schools. And the last thing I ever wanted to do was go into teaching. But I tried pig farming and I tried factory work, and neither of them suited. And a long story, but anyway, I eventually ended up training to be a teacher, and with the idea that it didn't work for me. So how can I help to make it better? And that's really my mission, my purpose, I feel.
And that's probably a really powerful story and narrative, isn't it? And I think, you know, when you look back, probably saying, right, well, this didn't work for me. How could it have been better for me? You know, everybody's different, but I definitely you know, that sort of motivation and thought process can be really, really valuable. I was talking to somebody about coaching the other day, and we were having a chat, and we were talking about where we learn from or who we learn from. And you still remember the best coaching sessions that we did at school, and you still remember what made those sessions good. And I remember thinking that when I started coaching, it's like, right, I'm going to take the best of what I've seen or when I was engaged and wanted to do it, and I'm going to get rid and make sure that I don't do the really bad ones, what I deemed as a really bad lesson. Now, that might not have worked, you know, that might be different for somebody else, but it was certainly quite a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can always improve coaching. Improve teaching. I used to think that either you were a good coach or you weren't. Either you had a way with kids that inspired and motivated and challenged them, or you didn't. And I'm totally unconvinced by that argument these days, and feel as if it's much more to do with all of us can improve our parenting, improve our coaching, improve our teaching, improve our profession generally. And that fits very closely with Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset, that her research shows that some people would be in a fixed mindset and they believe that either you're sporty or you're not, either you're mathematical or you're not. Whereas in a growth mindset, it's much more likely that you think, well, I can improve and I can get better. I can improve this part of my game or that part of my parenting or this part of my effort. And I might not get into the Ryder Cup team, but I can certainly improve from where I am right now. And I think that goes as much for coaching as it does for golf, as it does for basketball, as it does for any sport, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can all improve, and we've obviously all got a role to play in creating these amazing environments for young people to thrive, both in and out of sport and across, other environments as well. Now you've got 11 books. I think I'm right in saying that you've written about learning. And I'm keen to try and transfer some of your knowledge into a sporting context. So if I'm a parent and I've arrived from Mars this morning and I know absolutely nothing, which some people might say that's probably pretty true anyway. What do you think as a sports parent, if I'm wanting to watch my child learn and develop, what does learning look like? What do I need to know?
Yeah, I mean, if you've arrived from Mars, I'm thinking, forget talking about flipping learning and tell me your story, your backstory, and what was it like on Mars and how did you get here? But okay, so in effect, Gordon, what you're asking me to do is to summarize 11 books on learning, and yeah, there's so many things. Of course, there's so many things. Self-efficacy is something that is becoming more and more well known, but I don't think it's in the everyday consciousness right now. But self-efficacy is that idea that I can effect a new outcome. So not just affect, but effect, to create a new outcome. I have this ability to overcome, to figure it out, to determine what I can do to influence things. And so that's something that I'm particularly interested in at the moment, because I don't think self-esteem cuts it as well as it could. Self-esteem is that idea, I feel good about myself, I like myself, I esteem myself. And we come across many students, whether they are students of sport or students of learning in school, who perform very well, are very good at things, until they come across something they can't do, until they fail. And that's when you see an awful lot of kids giving up the sport, if it is that dramatic, or giving up with trying, or starting to blame the coach, or blame the course, or blame their friends. And what I've just described there is that person could have very high self-esteem and yet still feel helpless when faced with challenge. Whereas self-efficacy is that sense that there's always something I can do. I can influence things. I can change things. I can make things happen. And so I'm particularly interested in that at the moment, this idea of, well, how does self-esteem fit with self-efficacy? What can I do as a coach? What can I do as a teacher? What can I do as a parent to help children to build self-efficacy? I also look at confidence. I look at dialogue in the classroom, and it doesn't have to be in the classroom, it could be on the sports field, but how do we use dialogue in an exploratory way, rather than what so often happens is we as adults ask a question, our students or our children answer that question, and then all too often what we do is evaluate their answer. We either say that's very good, well done, or no, that's not right. And that evaluative approach can close things down very, very, very quickly. And most of my work is in schools with teachers, and I'm working quite a lot to help them to move beyond that approach of initiate, respond, evaluate, and move much more towards initiate, respond, explore, and looking at the sense of not confirming or denying, but actually asking for more. So interesting, Gordon, rather than very good, Gordon, or no, not right, Gordon. Say, interesting, Gordon, can you tell me more? Or do you think that would always work? Or could you show me that again? Could you change your stance and try it? Can you, what do you think? So building that sense of dialogue. So those are a few of the probably 30, 40, 50 different things that I write about.
Yeah, and that sort of touches around a little bit around motivational interviewing as well, doesn't it? That type of conversation is trying to get more from our children, having those conversations that allow them to reflect, but rather than passing that judgment, trying to get even more information out of them about what it really does look like, and listening, isn't it? I think it's really hard to listen well, is it not? Don't we all find that hard as teachers, particularly under a time frame? Let's say teachers and coaches who are trying to, let's say, get somewhere and feel that they're under a time demand. Do we sometimes jump in and close those questions down because we just have to, because that's where it is? Do you hear that? Does anybody say that to you?
Yeah, I think I would certainly agree with that. And the listening links to my last point about evaluation. I think so very often, and particularly in the circumstances you've just described, what we're very often doing is listening to evaluate rather than listening to understand or listening to explore. It's listening to evaluate, to understand what I can do to fix you in the role of coaching, or what I can do to point you in the right direction. And yeah, it's all very interlinked. I was having a chat with this old boy who, where I live now, he was the previous owner of the house I live in, and he owned it for 35 years, and he's proper old school, old GP. And he used to run a surgery from the house, and it's taken years for the taxi drivers to stop talking about it as Dr. Watson's house. It's my house. But he said that when listening, he always advised his trainee GPs that it's what the patient mentions as they leave that is typically the most important. So that they sit down and they're a bit nervous and they start talking, fluffing it about all sorts of things, and it's only as they go they might say, "Oh, just one thing," or "Oh, I've got this thing that I'm worried about." And so that I found that interesting. It's what they say last that perhaps is the thing that's most important.
Yeah, and I think that's creating that space and time, isn't it? And I'm thinking about work we do with parents around the car journey home, for example, or those conversations we have when our children are disappointed and we're trying to take the pain away, which we know isn't necessarily a great thing either in terms of fostering some of the other skills like resilience. So the ability to ask those open questions, which we talk a lot about, but I think, as you've alluded to there, that next stage of then being able to listen to those responses. I mean, I do joke with this, will make you laugh, James. I do joke when I've tried this sometimes with my own children. I don't get it right every week by any stretch, but I'll ask them, what did you make of that today? Or ask for some input. And some of the stuff that both of them have said to me, my son and daughter, I'm sat there thinking, were we at the same game today? Have I just watched something completely different? Because that really isn't my perception of it. And because I sort of live and breathe this, I've got better at sort of smiling a little bit about what I'm hearing, thinking, oh my goodness, the old me would have ploughed in with what an absolute load of rubbish. And that still happens as well if I'm just that way out or in that particular frame of mind. But I think that space and letting them talk their way through it, as you say, they will probably give us some really good information on how we can best support them next.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I'd like to, if I may, pick up on a point that you talked about there in terms of disappointment, because having now listened to you and thought about it a bit more, I think I might say the number one factor that I would love for everybody to understand about learning is that it's full of disappointment. It's full of setbacks. I think very many people think that learning is somewhat linear. You go from one step to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and that that's just not borne out by human experience. It's not borne out by research. It's not borne out by my personal experience. I'm sure it's not borne out by yours either, Gordon. It's so often that we're shown how to do something, and whilst our coach or our parent or our teacher is stood there guiding us, encouraging us, nurturing us, we have a go at it, and very often it goes pretty good. Like, wow, that was all right. So we start thinking, oh, I'm good at this, and maybe I'm a natural at this. But then the coach steps away because she or he's gone to see someone else. And then we try it again. And this time we haven't quite got our stance right, or we haven't quite got the approach right, or we've missed something that is important, but we didn't realize was important, but the coach knew it was important and made sure that we did it before, but we're not doing it now. And it doesn't go as well. And we fluff it. And then we get frustrated and we didn't want anyone to see it. So we rush the next go. And now we're getting a bit tense and it goes worse. And now we get this sense that I can't do this. So we've gone from I'm a natural, I can do this, to now I can't do it and I don't want to do it. And I think it's really important that we let children and adults know that that is the normal way of learning. That is typically what happens. And I'm not trying to scare them. I'm trying to forewarn them. You know, that idea of forewarned is forearmed. How much more would we be able to cope if we knew, well, that's just how it is. That's just what happens. You typically take a couple of steps forward and then one or two back. You know, you end up doing the cha-cha rather than walking in a straight line. That's what happens in learning. And I call that the learning pit.
Yep.
You don't have to call it the learning pit, but we have to, I think, let people know that this is how it is. And it's not you. You're not unusual in this sense. You're not the only one struggling. In fact, if you found learning straightforward and easy, you're probably by yourself, because everybody else struggles through it. And you look at the top professionals in whatever sport you're interested in, or the top performers in any discipline at all, and you hear their story, every single one of them will tell you about all sorts of issues and problems and learning pits, as I call them, that they've been through. And I think that is, it's odd that so few children expect it. Yeah. And indeed so few adults. I think that increasingly there's adults think, if I just throw money at this and I get them the right equipment and I get them the lots and lots and lots of coaching, they can bypass that and they can go straight to performing at a high level. And I think there's no bypass for this. You know, you have to go through it.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I would say about learning is expect it. And because you expect, this is not about being pessimistic, it's about, I know it's coming and therefore I can plan better, I can react better, I can be more strategic about it. If I may, and I don't want to call the pandemic a learning situation, but imagine if a year before the pandemic had kicked off, we had been told a pandemic's on its way. Well, actually, we were told, but imagine we had listened and we believed people and we knew, okay, a pandemic is coming. This time next year, it will be with us. Imagine how much more prepared we would have been. Imagine what we would have done in our businesses, in our families, in our schools, in our lives to be absolutely as ready as we possibly could be. As it was, it took us all by surprise. Well, it took us in the West by surprise. It didn't take those in the East by surprise. They've been through it before with the SARS pandemic. That's how come they responded so much better. You know, so I think, I'm not saying learning's a pandemic, but I am saying I think it is advantageous to coach, to counsel, to guide children to know that you will not get better and better and better each and every day. What will happen is you will get worse before you get better. You will find times where you feel totally off your game or totally off your learning. And the important thing is what we do to overcome that and to learn our way through.
Yeah, I mean, you just could not have put any of that for me any better. I think of sports parent workshops and this idea that we've got to normalise disappointment. We've got to, look at the difference between disappointment, failure, devastation. Which of what we're being upset about are the categories that certain events fall into. But as you say, we've got to be aware as sports parents that actually we should be prepared 20, 30 times a year to be disappointed or our children to be upset and not to be shocked by it. Because what I see a lot of is the natural reaction to our children being disappointed is this idea that, okay, I've got to rush in. I've got to take the pain away. I'm not prepared for this. I hate watching my kids upset and disappointed, even though it's not that big a deal. They've just lost a game. We seem to have got to a generation where one normal event is the biggest catastrophe in the whole world to a family. And I've seen parents who will make an excuse for their child, who will look to blame other people, who feel they have to take them to McDonald's to take the pain away, overdo the love and affection. All of these reactions to what actually are just a normal part of the sporting journey that they're going to come across. And that bit about, what you said at the end there, about this idea that our children aren't machines. They can't produce their best every day. And I had a fascinating chat with Steve Magnus that, as I said to you before the show last week, and we were talking about this. If everybody just got better every week, then everybody would be breaking the world record every week. Every time they did a sporting event, they'd be getting their top score and they would do it. And he came up with a really good phrase, really like this. He said, what we've got to do is stop looking at the ceiling, but raise the floor. And his point being that our average performance was the thing that we could look to improve. We'd always have the brilliant day and we'd have the bad day, but could we raise the middle as our level of expectation rather than always trying to think that raising the top is the only success criteria, which then brings me back to how with our children, and again, going back to a little bit of experience here, having spoken to all the Singapore gymnasts, I had a week in Singapore, amazing experience. I spoke to every single child in their international gymnastics program, just the kids, no coaches, no parents, just me and the children. And I said to them, do you understand how we learn? And the fact that it's all right to make mistakes and fail. And they were in total shock that that was all right. So how have we got to the stage where, I don't know, in this push for perfection or in this push for this perfect world that, as you say, we know nobody has or goes through in reaching the top, how can we do more to set up our children to develop those skills to get through these moments of learning or these moments of challenge? What does it mean for us as coaches? What does it mean for us as parents?
Yeah, well, 2 points, if I may. One is it links back to what I was talking about with self-efficacy as well. You are going to be disappointed. There's going to be many times where you feel as if you've gone backwards, that this week you can't do what you could do last week. What makes the difference is what you do about it, because there's always things that you can do. And so as a parent, I shouldn't just be empathizing, although that's an important part of it. I need to make sure that I don't say, oh, well, that's just how it is. That's just the rub of the green. That's just, that's the disappointment. You'll be fine. What I need to say is, that is how learning happens. We often get worse before we get better. There are things that we can do. So let's think back to when it was working. What do you think was working? What was some of the ingredients towards that success? So what do you think might have changed this time? What could you do? Now, there'd be other factors as well. And if you've been playing a match against another team, maybe they were just better on the day.
That's been, do you know what though, James? I think just when I think of my last few years in education, having left education now, I felt there was a really fundamental change in that. Whenever you lost a game, there was always an excuse from the parents or the coaches. And I had to say towards the end sometimes, do you know what? They were just better.
Yeah.
There was nothing else going on. They were better. We could have played that game 10 times and we would have been lucky if we won 1 out of 10 because they just did things better than we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm struggling to understand how we've got to that stage where we can't acknowledge that as well, that on that given day, somebody may just perform better than we do.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, last week, when the mighty Man City were beaten by tiny little Brentford, and Pep Guardiola says best team won on the day, and that's it. Not the best team on paper by a long stretch of the imagination, but the best team on the day. And yeah, they got beat on the day. And I think it is about that. But it's really important that we also then think, and what are we going to do about it next time? So analysing it. So that comes to the second point that you were talking about with mistakes and failure. Gordon, I don't want to make mistakes. I don't want to fail. And I don't want my students to fail. But I do want my students to be willing to step out of their comfort zone very many times. In fact, almost be excited by stepping out of their comfort zone. And I know that when people step out of their comfort zone, they are likely to make mistakes. In fact, the more they step out of the comfort zone, the more likely they are to fail. So when they do make mistakes and when they fail, I then want them to think, okay, what went wrong? What led to that? What can I learn from it? And what can I do next? And I'd like to link, if I may, some people listening might be aware of growth mindset as a term. And I work quite a lot with Carol Dweck, whose research led to this term, growth mindset. And she, when I wrote a book about growth mindset, I found it utterly fascinating that one of the most successful ways to get your children, your colleagues, your family, yourself into a growth mindset is to think about your reactions to failure. You see, if you fail and say, well, that was a stupid thing to do, I should never have done that, why on earth did I ever think I should do that, I will never do it again, that's really quite likely to put people that you influence into a fixed mindset, that sense of either you can or you can't, and that's how it is. But if you react to failure in terms of, well, that didn't work, I wonder why it didn't work. What led to that failure? What can I learn from it? And how can I design the next steps that will be less likely to lead to the same failure again? Then that's more likely to put people into growth mindset. And that's interlinked with what I was talking about before, self-efficacy. In other words, we have to get them to think there's always something that they can do. Yes, you might get beaten by a better team on the day, but what are you going to do about your performance that will give you a better chance of being the better team next time round? What can you do as an athlete or a sportswoman or man to adapt your game or improve your game or add an extra dimension to your game that's going to help? So it's this idea that disappointment, mistakes, and failure is normal. But hand in hand with that is, and there's always something you can do about it. So it's not blaming others, albeit others will have influenced it. It's not blaming anybody, actually. It's taking ownership and thinking, what can I do differently?
Yeah, and we know the top sports performers all operate in that way. We know that they don't look to seek to blame and make excuses. They can recognize issues.
Indeed.
And then are able to go and find solutions to them. Now, they may need support for those solutions from a number of people, but they're able to actively go and seek that and communicate and talk about it and work with the relevant people to solve that. And I think that's a really important thing for, parents who are listening to this to recognize in our children learning. And it also brings on, and many of you have heard, and I never label sports parents. In fact, I never label anybody or label parents because I don't think that's helpful. But when we do hear, in the press, the lawnmower parent, the snowplow parent, and everything else, what we're actually being labelled as is that we're removing these amazing opportunities for our children to learn and develop by stepping in and taking that learning away.
Yeah, that's absolutely
right, isn't it? And
for sure. Yeah, I mean, you and I, we are of an age, let's say, where as kids we played out. We just played out. Adults weren't watching us; they weren't supervising it. We just played out, and we came home if we were hungry, and we came home sometime after dark, as long as we can possibly, So when we got into a fight, we had to sort it out. When we got into an argument, we had to sort it out. When we fell and hurt ourselves, we sorted it. We sorted ourselves out. And that's not you and I living on the streets. That was what it was like growing up. These days, parents, myself included, dare not let our kids to roam too far for all sorts of reasons. And so kids are missing out on that independence. Parents are now, I mean, how many organized coached activities did you take part in as a kid? I mean, my kids are going from one thing to another, to another, to another. Whereas I don't remember, you went to play football, you went to play rugby, you went to play cricket, you went swimming, but most of the time adults weren't even involved in it.
Yeah, I think we had some of the structured sessions, didn't we? But as you say, what we also had was a ridiculous amount of playtime.
Indeed. Absolutely.
Was your background, I'm out to play football till 10 o'clock. Yeah. I'll come back for a bit of tea and that'll be it.
Exactly.
6 hours.
And how many kids get to do that? And of course, parents say, they're always on their mobile phone, they're always on their PlayStation. Yes, they are. But also, even when they're not on those devices, they seem to have less time away from the, as you call them, the snowplow parents or the helicopter parents and so on. So I do think that is a problem. I also think that it's increasingly competitive. I mean, we've got into school choice these days, whereas it used to be you rolled out of bed and you went to your local school. Now parents are driving their little darlings from one side of the city to another for what seems to be, is reputed to be a better school and so on. And it's this, okay, so everybody's trying to get ahead now, so I've got to make sure that my kids get ahead, and so on and so on and so on. And it spirals. I often think about years ago when the Icelandic volcano kicked off and we were all grounded. I found myself at Copenhagen airport. There was no stress. I mean, there was this worry about, are we ever going to get home? But there wasn't a stress because they've got this amazing ticketing system. You go to the machine, you say what airline you need, you say what your problem is, you press the button, you get a ticket, and that's it. You just sit down and you wait for your number to be called. Compare that to when there's this whole melee of people all trying to jostle and trying to, which queue will I get in, and is that one queue missing, is that moving quicker than this one? Right, there's a family of 4, right, each one of us stand in each of the queues and let's just see whoever gets to the front, then we'll, and there's that sense of competitiveness, that sense of, am I going to miss out? And I feel as if that's happening right now with parenting. It's that second situation that I've just described. It feels as if I've got to do this to keep ahead, to help my child to be this successful. And I think there's an awful lot that we're missing out there. So anyway, I mean, I've just taught very big society stuff. What on earth can I do as a parent? As a parent, what I need to be thinking about is, how do I help my children understand that disappointment is part of learning? how do I help my children to respond to that disappointment in a productive, proactive, positive way? It's not a case of just feeling okay about it. It is also about thinking, yeah, but that's normal. That's fine. It's a hurdle or it's a misstep along the way. And these are the things that I can do because I can influence outcomes. I'm not the only factor in this. Of course, luck, my opponents, the conditions, all sorts of things influence outcomes. But what I can take care of is what I do and what I'm going to do next. And if I might finish with a quick story, my three kids are swimmers. So I'm a swim dad. I basically spend my life touring the pools of southeast Scotland on yet another competition. And when my eldest, when she was only about 11, I think it was, she did a first 50-meter butterfly race. And so she'd just taken a step up from the 25-meter. And she won that race. And she was the youngest swimmer. And I mean, you can imagine the celebration. And as we were celebrating, the judge came over and said, "Ava, you're disqualified." And we're like, "What?" You didn't put both hands on the side at the same time when you turned. You did bum bum. And so you're DQ'd. Can you imagine the response of the parents around and about? Most of them say, "Well, it's not fair. The judge should have looked the other way. Remember, you're the youngest. That's cheating. That's too hard on them." Basically, they were giving the impression that Ava was hard done to because there's some officious, maybe even cheating referee who should have looked the other way. Better luck next time, as if what you just have to hope for is everyone else turns up with the bricks in their shorts so that they sing. It. And I, as you said earlier, we all get it wrong often. But on this occasion, I think I got it right. And first of all, I applauded her for her swimming. I said, "That was a brilliant, brilliant swim. Well done." And she said, "Yes, but I got disqualified." I says, "Yes, you did. For one mistake that you can put right in future. I bet you won't do that again, will you?" So is that, and she said, "No, I'll not do that again." Now, actually, as it happened later on, I had to then coach her out of this. She got into this habit of putting both hands on the side and turning and checking that the judge had spotted her putting both hands before she turned back. Anyway, but it was this sense of she'd done a really good job. She'd focused really well. Everything had come together at the same time. She made one mistake that meant she was disqualified. And the important thing wasn't the judge that was being too harsh. It wasn't unfair. The important thing was she can put it right next time. And that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I just love that story. I mean, there's so much you can unravel from that story. I mean, talk about the highs and lows and managing situations and how you learn from it and sort of go through it. Absolutely fantastic story as we approach the end of today's podcast. Final question then, James. If we got one piece of advice from everything we've talked about for sports parents supporting their children whilst they're learning and developing their craft, what would it be? What do you think's the one piece of advice that you think's the most important?
I think I probably mentioned it. So instead of repeating what I said, could I adjust the question slightly to what else would you mention? Right. So I think we also should be thinking about where's this motivation coming from? Is it intrinsic? Is it this is what the child actually wants to do? Or is it extrinsic? And that will then change matters. Now, all three of my kids have been through that stage of, I want to give up with swimming. Why do we have to train 5 times a week? I just want to play with my mates. And why do we have to do this? Is too hard. And so I've had to use extrinsic motivators to get them through that patch because I know that, or I don't know, but I feel quite sure that they'll regret giving up if they if they do prematurely. So I've had to go for that extrinsic, but insofar as possible, I want it to be intrinsic. And we were talking about just playing out with our mates. That was entirely intrinsic. We wanted to. We chose to. That's what we did. And when it is an intrinsic motivation, you will play for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. You'll practice and practice. You'll dream it. You'll eat, sleep, and dream your sport when it's intrinsic. But when it's extrinsic, it's just yet another thing that you have to get through the day or through the week, and so on. So I would just perhaps remind, because we all know this anyway, but remind your listeners that we should be thinking about the motivation for this sport. Is this what your children have chosen? Are we ensuring that it remains a pleasurable experience? So it's not about just doing it because they're seeking our approval, or doing it because they feel as if that's the only thing that makes them worthy. And it's super complex, I realize that, but I would be thinking about motivation as well as the other things we've talked about. This sense that learning is always includes disappointment, always includes going backwards as well as going forward. It always includes that sense of, I used to be able to do this and I can't now, so what on earth do I do? And so then it's our response to that. How can we help them to see that there are always things that they can do?
James, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. Quite amazing that we've managed to try to unpick 11 books, a wealth of experience, everything we know about learning, failure and disappointment, all into 45 minutes. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I hope that our listeners will certainly be able to take something away from this, and hope that they felt that it was a really normal conversation, that there are things that they can apply immediately. We both know as educators there's nothing worse than turning up, listening to something and having nothing of any real relevance, or things that are just too hard work to practically implement straight away. So James, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Gordon. Good to see you.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.